everybody, welcome to another episode of Japanese History for Everybody. Today we're going to talk about one of my favorite stories of Japanese history ever. The story about how one man's desire to paint instead of rule the country led to over 100 years of civil war and the death of hundreds of thousands of people. So everybody knows the Warring States period, right? It's one of the most well-known periods of Japanese history. But if you're not familiar, let me fill you in. The Sengoku period lasted roughly 136 years. It's generally accepted as being between the years of 1467 and 1615, with a little bit of debate here and there where it begins and ends. But most agree that it ends when three unifiers, Nobunaga, Hideyoshi, and Tokugawa, in three different time periods, bring the country back together and centralize it under the Tokugawa era. But do you know how this civil war began? Well, it starts and ends with a man named Ashikaga Yoshimasa, and the story is amazing. Today's story takes place at the end of the Ashikaga period, in 1464, which lands us right about here on the timeline. During the Ashikaga period, the shogun is the ruler of Japan, and the emperor is more or less a figurehead. If you want to learn more about this, I can explain it in a future video. So it's during the reign of Shogun Ashikaga Yoshimasa that Japan is going through a period of cultural growth known as the Higashiyama culture. In this period, you see the rise of things that are today commonly associated with Japanese culture, such as tea ceremony, flower arrangement, no drama, and sumie ink painting. Now, Ashikaga Yoshimasa loves all of this stuff. I mean, he becomes completely engrossed in Higashiyama culture. To be honest, he also makes for a terrible shogun. He has very poor skills as a military man, and he's even worse at running the government. So one day, he essentially says, "This job sucks. I want to paint." And it's not like he wants to be a famous artist or famous flower arranger. He literally wants to retire, move to the top of a mountain somewhere, and just paint and practice tea ceremony. And he honestly doesn't care what happens to the rest of the world when he does. The problem is, not only is he the shogun, but he doesn't have any kids. So let me take a step back. Ashikaga Yoshimasa is married to a woman named Hino Tomiko from the very powerful Hino family, and the two have struggled to have children. She basically has one child who dies on the day of his birth, and she blames the wet nurse, sending her into exile. In the many years afterwards, she fails to have any more children. So when the shogun announces that he's going to retire, the rest of everyone is like, okay, that's cool, but who's going to be your heir? So he chooses his younger brother, Ashikaga Yoshimi. But there's another problem. Ashikaga Yoshimi is a monk, and he has zero desire to be the shogun. He's basically forced out of being a monk, or coerced, or convinced, depending on how you look at it, and is chosen to become the heir. Now, Hino Tomiko is very much against this, but she has no real power, so she can't do anything about it. So Ashikaga Yoshimasa is like, okay, cool, I'm gonna retire now. I have my heir, and now I can move to Kyoto. And he establishes himself in the now famous Ginkakuji, and starts to live his best life. So now he's up in the mountains, painting, drinking tea, arranging flowers, and looking off into the Japanese sunset, when all of a sudden, his wife, who has impeccable timing by the way, suddenly gives birth. And it's a boy. And she names him Ashikaga Yoshihisa, the rightful heir by birth. But that's if he didn't already choose an heir, his younger brother. So this causes a huge divide. Hino Tomiko is obviously in favor of her son, so she rallies many of the major clans that her family has influence over, and they support the infant Yoshihisa. However, several of the other major clans have already pledged their support to the shogun's younger brother, Ashikaga Yoshimi. Basically, half of Japan's daimyo are Team Heir 1, while the other half are Team Heir 2, which means there's no longer a consensus on who the shogun is. And in the most simplistic of terms, Japan becomes a free-for-all. So this story does have a bit of a tragic ending, in the sense that pretty much everybody loses. When Ashikaga Yoshimasa officially retires in 1473, he's forced to choose his son, Yoshihisa, as his heir. However, Yoshihisa dies only 10 years later, and this forces Ashikaga Yoshimasa out of retirement and back into the position of shogun. And although Ashikaga Yoshimi doesn't become the shogun, his son does, after Yoshimasa passes away. And despite all of this, the damage is done. The Ashikaga shogunate never gains the respect and recognition that it did prior to this incident. And thus, the entire country of Japan plunges into civil war for 136 years, roughly. Until eventually Nobunaga comes and ruthlessly brings the country together through war and violence. Hideyoshi then finishes unifying it after his death, only to struggle to become recognized by the emperor and unable to become the shogun. And Tokugawa Ieyasu waits very, very patiently for a number of years for Hideyoshi to die and then step in and become the actual shogun of Japan, establish the Edo period, and peace reigns for 250 years. So that's it for today. I wish I had more of a takeaway, but I honestly don't. Perhaps the only thing I can derive from that is that one of the reasons why monarchy doesn't quite work really well is because the people don't have a chance of choosing who their next ruler is, and since there's no formal voting system, it can lead to things like civil war. Maybe one of the benefits of having democracy is that we all can vote, and even if your person doesn't win, we all just kind of have to accept it. That's also probably one of the things that are terrible about democracy now that I think about it. Please, if you like this video, subscribe, like the video, and leave me a comment if you want me to answer more information about this. Also, please tell me if there's a story in Japanese history that you want me to go into more detail about. I would love to talk more about things that people are interested in, not just the things that I'm interested in.